The wind that night cut through Red Bluff like a blade of ice. The town slept beneath a blanket of snow, its saloon lamps dim, its streets silent except for the groan of the wind, pushing against the old wooden storefronts. Out of that darkness came the faint jingle of spurs, slow, uneven, desperate. A lone rider slumped over his horse's neck, his head heavy with frost, his coat torn and stiff with the bite of winter. The animal stumbled through the drifts until it reached the edge of town, where a small homestead stood, its chimney breathing the only smoke for miles. The cowboy slid from his saddle and crumpled into the snow, too weak to call out. A lamp flickered behind the window. Martha Ellery saw the shape collapse near her porch and froze. She'd lived alone for years, her heart cautious as the winters were long, but something in the way that man fell, silent, defeated, broke through her fear. Wrapping her shawl tight, she stepped into the storm, knelt beside him, and whispered, "You're safe now, mister." She didn't yet know that saving him would set in motion a chain of events that would change her life forever and bring riders from far beyond Red Bluff to her very door. Martha Ellery's days passed like the ticking of an old clock, steady, lonely, and without surprise. Her homestead sat a mile beyond Red Bluff, where the prairie rolled out in golden waves that turned silver under the winter sun. Once, laughter had filled that little house. Her husband, Thomas, a gentle schoolteacher with ink-stained fingers and a fondness for poetry, had built it with his own hands. But fever took him 5 winters ago, leaving Martha with nothing but his books, a few chickens, and a patch of stubborn soil that refused to yield much more than onions and prayer. The townsfolk admired her strength but pitied her solitude. Kind woman, they said, but she talks more to the wind than people. They weren't wrong. Martha often stood by her fence at dusk, watching the sun fall behind the red hills, wondering if God had forgotten her or simply waited for her to remember hope. The wind howled against the windows as Martha struggled to pull the half-frozen cowboy through her doorway. His weight nearly took her down, but she managed to drag him toward the hearth, the boards creaking beneath their boots. Snow melted from his coat in wet clumps, puddling on the rug. His face was pale, his lips blue, and a faint cut ran along his cheekbone. Without thinking, she stripped off his gloves and pressed his trembling hands toward the fire. When he finally opened his eyes, they were sharp gray, the kind that had seen too much of the world. "Name's Eli," he rasped, voice rough as gravel. "Eli Carter, rode in from Wyoming." He tried to sit up, but she placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You'll do no such thing till you've warmed and eaten," she said, ladling soup into a tin bowl. He nodded gratefully, though something in his eyes, something shadowed and restless, told her this man wasn't just running from the cold. He was running from something far colder. The days that followed carried a quiet rhythm, the kind that only winter and shared work could create. Eli regained his strength quickly, though his movement stayed careful. As if he feared breaking the fragile peace between them, he chopped firewood behind the house, mended her broken fence, and brushed snow from the roof while Martha tended to her chores inside. In the evenings, they'd share supper by lamplight, her soft voice filling the silence with stories of her husband and the days when laughter had still lived in the house. Eli listened more than he spoke, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug, eyes reflecting the fire's glow. When she finally asked where he'd go once spring came, his gaze drifted to the window, to the horizon swallowed by gray. "Don't rightly know," he said after a pause. Outside, faint hoofbeats echoed through the wind, too distant to place, yet close enough to make the horses restless in the barn. The morning Martha rode into town for supplies, the wind carried more than dust, it carried gossip. Inside the general store, the talk was low but sharp as a knife. A new bounty poster fluttered on the wall near the counter, its corners tacked with rusty nails. Martha's eyes caught the name before she could stop herself. Eli Carter. Below it, the words burned: horse thief, reward $500. Her stomach turned cold. The townsfolk muttered about a drifter, wanted across to territories, a man who'd stolen from his own employer and vanished into the plains. Martha left her groceries behind and rode home fast, snow biting her cheeks. Eli was out by the barn when she arrived, mending the gate. She dismounted, trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. His hammer fell silent. After a long pause, he said quietly, "Because they wouldn't understand. I took those horses, but to feed men left to starve by a rancher who'd sooner watch them die." That night, the house felt colder than it ever had before. Martha sat by the fire, her mind waging war with itself. Outside, the wind moaned through the eaves like a warning. Eli stood near the door, head in hand, eyes heavy with shame. "You could turn me in," he said quietly. "Collect the bounty, clear your name before they tie you to mine." But Martha couldn't look at him that way, not as a criminal, not after the kindness and quiet strength she'd seen. Her heart pounded as she packed a small bundle, bread, jerky, a wool blanket, and her late husband's old revolver. She placed it in his hands, her voice trembling. "Go," she whispered. "Before the law gets here." Eli hesitated, his breath clouding in the chill dawn. Then he tipped his hat, eyes full of unspoken gratitude, and rode into the pale horizon. Martha watched until he vanished, her tears glinting like frost. The days that followed felt slower than ever, as if time itself had lost its will to move. Martha rose before sunrise, tending to her small flock and the patch of earth that would soon thaw beneath the frost. Yet even as she worked, her thoughts wandered down the trail Eli had taken. She told herself he was long gone, perhaps back to Wyoming, perhaps caught by men with faster horses. But every creak of the barn door, every knock of wind against the shutters sent her heart leaping. The silence in that house had grown heavier, filled with echoes of a voice she couldn't forget. The townsfolk still whispered when she went to market, some saying she'd been a fool, others that she'd hidden the outlaw herself. She ignored them all. But one gray morning, as the first light spilled across her porch, she opened the door and froze. There, wrapped in a scrap of burlap, lay a bundle. Inside was a folded note, its handwriting careful and strong. "For your kindness, always." Beneath it rested a silver locket, cool against her palm. When she opened it, she found a tiny picture of a ranch brand, a symbol she didn't know, but one the story's lens lingered on, as if it carried the promise of a return. The evening sky burned with streaks of orange and violet when the sound came, a low rumble that made the windows tremble in their frames. Martha stepped onto the porch, her heart tightening. It wasn't thunder. It was hooves, many of them. A cloud of dust rose from the distant ridge, and soon she could make out riders, a dozen or more, galloping straight toward her homestead. Panic seized her chest. Had the law come for her, for helping him? She darted inside, grabbed her late husband's revolver from the mantel, and stood by the door, breath unsteady. The riders slowed as they neared the gate. Then one man dismounted, his silhouette tall against the dying sun. When he stepped forward, Martha's breath caught. It was Eli, but he wasn't the half-starved drifter she'd known. He was clean-shaven, steady, wearing the coat of a ranch foreman. "You gave me a second chance," he said softly. "Now I'm here to repay it." Behind him, his men began unloading sacks of flour, bundles of firewood, and seed for her barren fields. Martha's tears blurred the sight, her porch alive again with warmth and purpose. As the riders unloaded the last of the supplies, Eli stood beside Martha, the firelight from her window casting a soft glow over his face. He spoke quietly, almost reverently. "When I left here," he said, "I meant to keep running. But your kindness made a coward feel like a man again. I turned myself in, told the truth. The law listened. The rancher who'd lied about me lost everything. Now I've got men working honest land, and I owe that to you." Martha's eyes shimmered with tears as she watched his men laughing, stacking firewood by her porch. Her home, once so silent, now buzzed with life again. Eli turned to her with a gentle smile. "Come live among friends, Martha, not ghosts." She looked toward the horizon, then back at him, her heart thawing as the hearth behind them roared with new warmth. The camera drifts upward, catching the soft glow of lantern light spilling from Martha's windows, the sound of laughter mingling with the rustle of prairie grass. The narrator's voice settles low and reflective, wrapping the story in warmth. In a land ruled by cold winds and harder hearts, one woman's kindness did what bullets never could. It changed a man's life. The image lingers on the silver locket resting on her windowsill, its surface glinting beneath the firelight, a quiet reminder of mercy repaid in full. The wind carries away the echo of hoof beats, leaving only peace, the kind found in a heart that chose compassion over fear, kindness. The narrator reminds us, sows redemption even when the world calls it foolish. Then, a gentle invitation. If you were Martha, would you have trusted the stranger that night? Tell us in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of love, courage, and second chances in the Wild West.